The G20 or Group of 20 is an international forum for discussing and regulating issues relating to the global financial and economic order. The first meeting of finance ministers and central bank governors took place in Berlin on December 15th and 16th in 1999. This meeting is considered to be the founding of the G20. The heads of state and government and finance ministers, and possibly others as well, meet usually as a part of the G20 ministers and central bank presidents of the 19 politically and economically most powerful industrialized countries and important emerging countries, including representatives of the EU and other international organizations. Following the decision by their heads of state and government at the Pittsburgh G20 summit in September 2009, the Group of 20, the G20, is the central forum for international economic cooperation. Like the G7, the G20 is an informal forum. It's not an international organization. It has neither its own administrative apparatus nor a permanent representation of its members. The G20 countries represent just over 80% of global gross domestic product or GDP and global CO2 emissions, 3/4 of world trade, and around 2/3 of the world population. The G20 includes 19 countries and the EU. The countries are Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, Germany, France, Great Britain, India, Indonesia, Italy, Japan, Mexico, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, South Korea, Turkey, and the USA, as you can see here. International organizations such as the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, the World Bank, the Financial Stability Board, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, the World Trade Organization, the WTO, also regularly attend the G20 summits at the invitation of the Presidency, the International Labour Organization, and the United Nations. In addition, the Presidency may invite other states and regional organizations. So far, Spain and the chairman of the African Union and NEPAD, that's New Partnerships for Africa's Development, ASEAN, that's the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and other changing guests have been invited regularly. Originally, as a reaction to the financial crisis in Asia in the 1990s, the G7 finance ministers decided in 1999 to hold G20 meetings at the level of finance ministers and central bank governors from the leading industrialized and emerging countries. The founding meeting, as I said, took place in Berlin in December 1999 under the German presidency. Under the impact of the global financial and economic crisis, the heads of state and government of the G20 countries decided in autumn 2008 to use the G20 format for an exchange at their level as well. They met for the first summit in 2008 in Washington in the United States. They drew up a catalogue of measures to eliminate weaknesses in the global financial system. That had become apparent during the crisis as quickly as possible with suitable reforms and to contain the consequences of the crisis for the real economy. Since the Pittsburgh G20 summit in 2009, the G20 has been the central informal forum for international economic cooperation, originally with a clear crisis focus. The agenda has changed a lot since then. The G20 is increasingly turning to the development of long-term solutions to other global challenges. Questions in the areas of climate and energy policy, trade and food security, and labor market policy have gained in importance. Since the Seoul summit in 2010, the G20 has also been dealing with the impact of its policies on developing countries and support options. Pandemics, infectious diseases, threats, and antimicrobial resistance have been key issues for the G20 since 2014. At the summit in Brisbane in Australia, the heads of state and government agreed on a joint declaration for the first time. Under the German G20 presidency, the health ministers of all G20 participants met for the first time and, among other things, carried out a practical pandemic exercise. In 2016, under its presidency, China declared digitization to be another priority of the G20. The G20 then launched a joint initiative to develop the digital economy and cooperate in this area. Germany continued this initiative, and the G20 digital ministers met for the first time under the German G20 presidency. In 2019, the heads of state and government met in Osaka in Japan. In 2020, Saudi Arabia held the presidency. The G20 summit planned for November 2020 in Riyadh, or that happened there, was mainly held via video conference due to the corona pandemic. And previously in March 2020, the G20 met via video conference to plan a coordinated global response to the effects of the pandemic. In 2021, Italy held the G20 presidency. The summit took place in Rome on October 30th and 31st. Indonesia took over the G20 presidency in 2022. The G20 summit is then to take place in Bali. The most visible part of the G20 process are the summit meetings of the heads of state and government, the organization and preparation of which is in the hands of the respective presidency. In the run-up to the summit meetings, a dense process of political coordination develops between the governments at various working levels. For example, there are working groups on specific specialist topics and in some cases, ministerial meetings. The topics for the summit are prepared by the so-called Sherpas, who meet several times a year. German G7 and G20 Sherpa is State Secretary Dr. Jörg Kukies, for example. He's the personal representative of the Federal Chancellor for the G7 and G20 summits. I'm just mentioning Germany because I'm German. The summit meetings offer the opportunity to issue summit declarations with the most important results and, in some cases, accompanying declarations, initiatives, reports, and work plans, as well as the opportunity for personal exchange between the heads of state and governments. The summit declarations of the G20 can usually be found under the overview of the summit documents of the G7 and the G20. The German government attaches great importance to dialogue with interest groups and non-G20 countries. Responsibility for this lies with the respective G20 presidency. The federal government was also extensively involving civil society and other interest groups, as well as non-G20 countries in the preparations for the G20 summits. The Federal Chancellor and the German Sherpa regularly met representatives of non-governmental organizations to talk to them about G7 and G20 issues. And as I mentioned before, I of course took the German example because I'm filming here in Germany, but with different balancing of the different topics, of course, the other G20 presidencies do probably most exactly the same. But I get a better look on the German ones, of course, when I'm German myself. So I hope I could give you a slight overview what the G20 are, because many people are always talking about G7, G20 and whatsoever. And that's why I have this channel, to give you an introduction to those topics. And I hope it helped. I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.